Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Agatha.
1996 saw several different types of cinematic alien invasion, including the bombastic destruction of Independence Day, the time-traveling attack of the Borg in Star Trek First Contact, and the insidious infiltration of the creatures in The Arrival. But the most fun threat to humanity easily came from Tim Burton's gleefully anarchic throwback to the 1950s heyday of sci-fi, Mars Attacks.
My fellow Americans, this is a momentous occasion. It is profoundly moving to know there is intelligent life out there. Alien life. And our world will never feel quite the same again. Once you believe.
Martians, please come to Earth, please.
Once you rise above fear.
Annihilate! Kill!
Let's not be too rash. Then you'll be invited.
Hi there. Are you interested in the White House?
To meet with a new people.
It's so perfect that it's happening at the beginning of the new millennium.
More powerful than the might of America.
I'll tell you one thing, they ain't getting a TV.
More advanced than the brains of Britain.
Ladies and gentlemen, this could be a cultural misunderstanding.
But be prepared for a few changes to what we know and love.
You're Tom Jones, right? It ain't unusual.
As we must learn to dance.
Girls, get out!
To a new tune. From director Tim Burton. Mars Attacks.
Images from the Hubble telescope reveal a shocking event. The Martians are coming. Obtuse President James Dale ponders how to respond to this imminent first contact, with his scientific advisor Donald Kessler certain the aliens come in peace, while the pugnacious General Decker urges him to prepare for war. When the Martians reveal their gleefully violent intentions for mankind, a wide cast of characters struggle to avoid annihilation, including a former prizefighter, the First Daughter, and international singing star Tom Jones. Can humanity survive? As usual, we'll be discussing Mars Attacks in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. Mars Attacks was released by Warner Brothers on December 13th, 1996, where it opened against Citizen Ruth, Jerry Maguire, and The Preacher's Wife. It was shot on a budget of $70 million, about $100 million after marketing, and made $101 million at the box office, so it was considered a box office failure, particularly coming after Independence Day and all the millions that movie made. As for awards, it won a Saturn Award for Best Music for Danny Elfman's soundtrack and was nominated for Best Performance by a Young Actor for Lucas Haas, who lost to Lucas Black for Sling Blade. Best Director for Burton, lost to Roland Emmerich for Independence Day. Best Supporting Actress for Glenn Close, who lost to Alice Krige for Star Trek First Contact. Best Costumes, also lost to Star Trek First Contact. Best Special Effects, lost to Independence Day, no surprise there. Best Writer for Jonathan Gems, lost to Kevin Williamson for Scream, and Best Science Fiction Film, lost to Independence Day. It was also nominated for an MTV Movie Award for Best Fight for the big fight scene between Jim Brown and the Martian ambassador. And the movie is based on the 1962 Topps Trading Card series. So, Agatha, what were your first experiences with Mars Attacks?
This isn't one I saw in the theater. I would have been the right age for it, but honestly, I wasn't ready for this kind of movie. And that isn't a level of sophistication more than it is. I just hadn't been exposed to the movies that would make sense for the references. So I really hadn't seen any of the 50s sci-fi films. If I had seen it when it came out, I would have been unimpressed, because I wouldn't have known what the tropes were. So I'd be walking into something not knowing the joke. I came to it several years later. It was fun. I really liked all the ack because I swear that's what's coming out of my mouth all the time. But it took me, like 10 years to really, I get what this is doing, which is embarrassing, but it did take that long.
I feel like it took a lot of people a while to kind of get the vibe of this movie, because I remember it was really not popular at all when it came out. I remember I did see it in the movie theaters, and it's another one of those cases where me and my family went, and I remember us laughing uproariously at this, and a lot of the audience seemed kind of confused by it at points. And I think part of it is that unfortunate thing of coming out right after Independence Day, and people more geared for that. But I love this movie. I could not stop talking in Martian for a long time. In fact, at the video store I worked at, a lot of the other employees liked it, and we would actually speak to each other in Martian across the store. And if you went to the Salem Blockbuster around the late 90s, you might have heard employees just going, gak, 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 gak. And we could almost get to a point where we'd understand what the person meant. So let's talk about the unfortunate matchup of Independence Day versus Mars Attacks. Seems like that was going on a lot around the late 90s, because you had Volcano versus Dante's Peak.
Armageddon
Deep Impact in 1998. Yeah, there was a lot of that. And usually in those cases, one would be the big hit and one would be seen as the disappointment. And certainly in this case, Independence Day was the big hit and this one was the disappointment.
Honestly, the impression I got from those paired up releases was that one was the blockbuster and one was the mockbuster. Because I was working at a video store at that time. So the idea that I looked at the one that came after, usually, as a ripoff just kind of goes to show why these movies flopped.
I think in a lot of cases, it was, hey, this studio's come out with this movie. Do we have anything that's like it that we can rush out and get out there first?
I think in this case, Independence Day was a lot more accessible because it was, hey, the U.S. is in trouble, the world is in trouble, alien invasion, and it's very straightforward. Mars Attacks, while it has the similar premise, it's rooted in a history of classic sci-fi alien invasion films. For a movie like Mars Attacks to succeed, a wider audience would have had to have seen those 50s sci-fi spoofs. So they're coming at the same topic from two very different angles. And in this case, it wouldn't have mattered which one came first. Independence Day was going to win.
And it does remind me a lot of the unfortunate Dr. Strangelove failsafe face-off.
Which is such a shame because they are both brilliant movies doing two very different things with the same topic.
Yeah, that's the thing. If Failsafe had come out first, I think it would have been seen as this really groundbreaking, hard-hitting drama. And I don't know if Dr. Strangelove, I think it still would have been the classic that it is anyway, but I think there would have been room for both of them. But with Strangelove first, there's no way anybody could take Failsafe seriously after that. And I can't help but wonder what would happen if it had flipped and Mars Attacks had come out first and Independence Day after. So much of this movie is almost beat for beat at points doing a jokey version of that film.
Right.
I think you are right in that Independence Day took basically a 1950s sci-fi plot
and just updated it. It's
much more of a big crowd-pleasing blockbuster Star Wars type thrill ride. It does make sense that one would hit bigger. And politically also, just the rah-rah patriotism and globalism of Independence Day does feel a little bit more in step with where I think we were politically at that point.
Oh, yes, definitely. Late 90s politics.
Following the Gulf War, we just had a big military victory. Everyone was like, yay, our military, isn't that great?
Yeah, it was kind of like a Pax Romana. And I think the feeling of pride for America around that time had the 50s flavor.
Yeah. Mars Attacks is so pointed in its commentary and really cynical and mean-spirited, taking a lot of jabs at American exceptionalism and the military and everything else. And I think a lot of viewers just weren't really in tune with that at that period. Now, if that came out now, or if it came out like, say, the 1970s, probably would have hit a lot bigger. So let's talk about it as a 1950s sci-fi spoof. We've talked about this in other episodes on some of the movies from the 50s, that idea of so many of those films fall into two categories. The ones where the aliens are the good guys and our heroes are usually the scientific, intellectual types who are trying to promote understanding, and the ones where the aliens are the bad guys and invading, and then our focus is on the military and the guys who are going to clean up, and all the scientists are just kind of ineffectual, wishy-washy, communist sympathizer type guys. And I like that this movie, while it is an alien invasion movie, makes fun of both sides equally. They're both made to look very, very ridiculous. There's a lot of very specific homages you can see all over this movie, particularly Earth versus the Flying Saucers. The flying saucer shape, the central core that kind of stays in place and the disc spins, that is exactly the Ray Harryhausen flying saucer from that. They invade Washington. They blow up a lot of Washington landmarks. They're taken out by some kind of sonic weapon that causes all their ships to crash. So that's very similar.
And obviously Burton grew up with these films and loved them so much he just wanted to show them off. It's what he did with Ed Wood. He took something that he loved as a kid and polished it off and wanted to show it his way. Try to recapture that love for a new generation.
Well, it kind of goes back to that whole idea of once you have a generation of filmmakers that grow old enough to make films themselves, usually what they do is make homages to their past, like George Lucas with, say, Star Wars, or Spielberg with Indiana Jones. They always kind of go back to the things they grew up on and throw that on screen, and that's certainly here with Burton in this. And sometimes gussied up with better effects.
Right.
The end of this, there's a bunch of references to This Island Earth. The whole flying saucer crashing in the ocean is right out of the end of that movie. The mutant with the exposed brain might have been an influence on the original design for the Martians for the
I believe
cards.
it.
War of the Worlds, there's a few of them. They actually apparently tried to get the original Death Ray sound from War of the Worlds, and either they couldn't get it for legal reasons, or more likely because they talk about this in the War of the Worlds Blu-ray, the people at Paramount couldn't figure out how it was done originally. Right. So they kind of approximate and they come close. And that scene of the Eiffel Tower being blown up in the background is a almost perfect recreation of a still from War of the Worlds of Paris being blown up. And even a couple non-alien invasion ones, like I look at Pierce Brosnan's head hanging there disembodied and I think of the brain that wouldn't die.
Exactly. One of the robots, it's a giant kind of like an at, but it, can we just call it an ack-ack? Is that okay? It's an ack-ack. One of the aliens kind of drives around, reminds me of like Robbie the Robot a little bit, right?
It definitely has the shape and style of that type of robot from the 50s, yeah. When we actually get to see Mars in this movie, it is the very unscientifically accurate sort of 1950s Chesley Bonner style, beautifully painted, rocky red sort of landscape.
In fact, the whole movie takes on that palette. It's very orange, red, green. So it's kind of a mashup of Earth and Mars in terms of color. There's the Close Encounters of the Third Kind reference. I'm sure there are many more than this, but Barbara Land is at a distance on kind of a mountain face, and she's watching the aliens and the humans interact. And it's very similar to Roy and Gillian from Close Encounters of the Third Kind looking at the aliens. In fact, I think Gillian was the only one still up there at that point, so it echoed it.
That scene also kind of reminded me of a flip version of the big opening scene from Day the Earth Stood Still. Humans and military meet, and somebody screws up and starts shooting, and things go horribly, horribly wrong. There is one other theme I wanted to bring up. I'm interested to look at this as sort of a portrait of America post-Gulf War, because I do think there's a lot in this movie that kind of relates to that, particularly when it comes to the character of Billy Glenn, the young American son who joins the army and supposedly fights the Martians and suddenly becomes an American hero. I feel like there is this sense in America after the Gulf War of, pride in our military. Aren't they great? They can do anything. And Burton is kind of pointing fun at that. And also the media, too. We saw how much of the Gulf War was kind of a war by news networks. The war presented as this adventurous thing on the news. Hey, look at our missiles blowing this up. Isn't this great? And all these military generals who suddenly became household names where before we wouldn't really know them until long after the battle. But here instead we're seeing Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell directing our armed forces and we can root for them. It was sort of like the war as video game in a weird way. And I feel like we see a little of that too, especially with some of the general characters who bear striking resemblance to Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell as we get into it. All right, as for the origins of this, it's based on this Topps Cards set that came out in 1962, featuring art by Norman Saunders. And it seemed like it was trying to tap into the same kind of horrific entertainment style as the old EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Kind of peddled, hey, look at this horrible stuff. Isn't this cool, kids? Don't you want to see this? And got in trouble for it and got ripped off the shelves. So I think they figured, well, we'll put it in a sci-fi story instead. But we can kind of do the same thing. The appeal will be, look at the horrible stuff Martians are doing to humans. Isn't that gruesome? Don't you want to collect them all and trade them with your friends? And the kids were into that. And of course, they still managed to get in trouble because that card set eventually drew the ire of a lot of parents and got pulled off the shelves, and that was it.
That's something that continued on. I mean, we got Garbage Pail Kids in the 80s. I don't know what they have now, but I'm sure it's something that people our age group would probably not be okay with.
Anyway, there was such an outcry that the original set got yanked from shelves and sort of disappeared. But it was, fondly remembered by people, and eventually they did a rebooting of it in 1994. And there's quite a few scenes from this movie that come from the original, but also from the rebooted set as well.
Now, was the rebooted set kind of knowing that this was coming?
I couldn't quite tell.
Yeah, because that would be around the right time to reissue the cards.
The movie had been in development since the mid-'80s.
Right.
But it hadn't really gotten much traction. I'm not sure if the rebooted card thing lit a fire and had been go, oh, there's this.
Or if it was the opposite.
Or if it was the opposite. It's kind of tough to tell.
Right.
But anyway, the original plan for this in the 1980s, it was going to be directed by Alex Cox, the director of Repo Man and Sid and Nancy.
It would have been a totally different movie.
I found the script for it. It's a really odd script. It almost has nothing to do with the original story of the cards or even the style of them. It had a weird satirical tone, almost along the lines of like Southland Tales, involving this sleazy PR exec who's hired by the Martians to help them implement this imperialistic takeover of Earth. And they're trying to like foist their exports on humans and use up natural resources like it's a third world country. It almost feels like a goofy Martian version of The Man in the High Castle. And it's interesting. I don't think it should have been a Mars Attacks movie, but I would have been curious to see it as its own entity because it has some interesting stuff to it.
Wouldn't it be fascinating to see an alien invasion film that was more the aliens marketing themselves so well that they infiltrate?
That would be pretty cool. And
Yeah.
that was kind of what they were trying to do with this. One really creepy thing in there, the PR firm in the script had represented previous presidents, including Carter, Reagan, and Donald Trump. And mind you, this was written in the mid-'80s.
That's the joke that actually happened.
It's creepy.
Yes.
It's really frightening that something that would have been this really loony joke is an unfortunate reality now. So anyway, Cox eventually drifted away from it. British author Martin Amis worked on the script for John Davison, the producer of RoboCop. That didn't get approved. Now, the rumor is that Burton was actually trying to develop Dinosaurs Attack, a follow-up card series by Topps, but Warner's option on the rights for that had expired, and the success of Jurassic Park made Burton think, well, it's just going to be kind of glomming onto that.
He was right.
Burton had known about Mars Attacks from his youth, and he had Warner Brothers buy the rights to that for him. He tapped Jonathan Gems to write the screenplay, and it had an uncredited rewrite by Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, the guys who wrote Ed Wood. Mm-hmm. Gems has actually since stated that he believes Burton probably deserved a co-writing credit on the script because so much of what happens in it did come directly from him. There's a couple bits that are actually taken directly from the cards. The opening scene with the cattle on fire is actually one of the cards in the original 60s.
Honestly, when I saw that for the first time, it gave me chills because I didn't know what kind of movie I was coming into.
It's a really disturbing scene. And even now, I mean, it almost plays like something that could be from a legitimately scary sci-fi movie.
Absolutely.
The scenes of humans being subjected to gruesome experiments was something they did in the 90s set. Martians destroying a government body. It was Parliament in the cards, Congress in the movie. The dog being burned alive with a ray gun, which was a controversial one. They had to change that eventually because that upset too many people. A Martian removing its beautiful woman disguise, popping the head right up over its head, like we see in the film. The shot from this is an exact replica of that card. People being hit by shrinking rays, all these little things. There was a lot of other stuff in the cards of like the Martians unleashing these giant insects to attack Earth, which I'm almost surprised Burton didn't go for because it seems like that would be the chance to spoof another genre.
It
and
may
throw
have
that in
been a
there.
bit too much. Like if he'd been able to do a sequel to this type of film, it wouldn't be Mars Attacks. It would be like Ants Attacks.
Bugs Attack or
yeah,
something?
Right.
Yeah,
It's a little too much to put in there.
yeah. I mean, certainly this movie is stuffed to the gills as it is. As for Burton, I feel like he brings the kind of vibe to this that Joe Dante brought to Gremlins. I can't help but feel like Burton is kind of on the side of the Martians for a lot of this movie.
Well, there's a love. There's an absolute love that you can feel Burton has for these aliens, and affection.
You can look at the stuff that the Martians are doing, and I just feel like Burton's like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to destroy all this stuff and have a ball doing it. This is the kind of thing that appeals to my sense of humor.
I see.
When we see the Martians just causing wholesale destruction, like destroying Easter Island like bowling, you can almost sense that that's part of the reason they want to invade Earth is not just to conquer, but let's see how many different ways we can mess up humans with our weird little gadgets and toys and things. Like the scene where they're wheeling in a giant death ray to blow up this one old woman's head. You can tell they're doing this stuff to some degree just because they want to see what it's going to be like.
Oh, yeah. They just want to see what's going to happen. And that's very childlike. It's a little weird to think of an invading force as having such deep curiosity and playfulness.
They're little pranksters, basically.
Yeah.
And that feels kind of like what Burton's doing with this movie. I'm going to get this big cast of actors. I'm going to put them on all these important parts, the president, the first lady, the generals, and then I'm going to kill them one by one in front of the audience. So this people come in thinking they're going to see Jack Nicholson fighting aliens, and that's not going to be the case.
What if, and I know this is a little off topic and ridiculous, but what if the Martians are school trips? So the ones wearing the robes are the teachers. And the rest of them are the school children. It's sort of like Predator coming to Earth to hunt. They're having playtime.
Okay, that's an interesting parallel with the tour group that...
Exactly, with the kids who go into the White House.
Yeah, the group that Cedric and Neville are, where it's clearly a tour they're not really getting much out of, and they're bored.
So why not just start blasting stuff with lasers, which is exactly what the kids do later in that movie. In that scene, in fact, I'm sure they were bored stiff, but they also jumped right into action. Looked as if they were having a good time, not maniacally, but they were prepared. I have headcanoned this. The aliens are school kids and the ones in robes are the chaperones or teachers.
Now, Burton's films often focus on the outsider or individual pitted against or in contrast to like the aspects of society that he can't stand, the pretentious ones, the really shallow and materialistic ones. We see it all over Beetlejuice, particularly Edward Scissorhands, that whole suburb. And I feel like they're the ones who are, for the most part, getting punished in this movie. They're the ones we're seeing getting massacred. But the characters who you can tell that Burton kind of likes because they are the weirdos, the outsiders, they tend to be the ones who survive and actually do well in this movie.
There are certain creators who create things that have a look and a sameness while still being interesting. And Burton is one of those creators. Just like how Gilliam's work all look the same, even though they're about completely different things. These are Burton tropes. Whenever you have an outcast character, that's the character who is going to shine the most.
Those are the ones, the stories that he really seems to get into. I remember seeing the Planet of the Apes remake, and it was the first Burton movie that didn't work for me at all. And I realized, yeah, I don't think there's a weird outsider that he really attaches to in this particular story. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think that one worked. You got like Taffy Dale, the first daughter. She's kind of the sensible one, has a very Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice quality to her.
Absolutely. I'm a child, but I understand and see what you're doing as adults, and it's stupid. I did want to mention the fact that Burton does put young teenage girls in the same role, the dark and moody and morose, but also wiser than her years kind of stuff. And it just smacks me as like, oh, so this is the kind of girl Burton wanted to date when he was that age. So he's just going to keep recreating her over and over. He has other movies doing very similar types. They're not manic and pixies, but they're dream girls. So I think maybe they're morose, morbid dream girls.
You got a character like Byron Williams who's just decent and brave and actually self-sacrificing. The fact that Richie, the Lucas Haas character, is loving and devoted to his grandmother seems to be the redeeming trait that kind of saves him. And Tom Jones, who of course survives, well, because he's Tom Jones. We also see Burton bringing back several actors he's worked with previously. Jack Nicholson, of course, from Batman. Danny DeVito from Batman Returns. Sarah Jessica Parker, who he had just worked with on Ed Wood. Sylvia Sidney from Beetlejuice. And Olan Jones from Edward Scissorhands, who played the creepy neighbor. So let's start off right off the bat with Jack Nicholson as the president, James Dale, and as Art Land, the creepy Vegas developer guy.
One character too many.
Yeah. I actually really like that as the president, he's kind of toned down from a lot of the comedic parts he normally plays. He's going much more for the earlier smarmy Nicholson persona from like the 60s and 70s than the wild man kind of persona.
Definitely a more subtle take than I thought Nicholson would have taken.
Yeah. I like that Dale's only real attribute to be president is that he's okay at giving a speech. That's it. That's all he's got. He can't really make a decision very well. He's constantly kind of lost and looking to his advisors to point him, and he seems pretty easy to sway in one direction or another. The only thing he has is that he can get on the air, say a comforting fireside speech to the American public, and that's it. And we see that that ability finally fails him when he tries to pull it on the Martians, and it goes nowhere. That's kind of all he's got. In terms of this politician who's ruled by, hey, this will look good in prime time, this will look good for my administration in the long run, he's a far cry from Bill Pullman getting into an F-18 and flying and launching missiles against the invaders himself.
I read his performance as very Nixon-like. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that is something I decided on way before I knew what Nixon was like.
I would agree with that. Certainly the mannerisms and some of the ways he speaks feel like a more polished Nixon. Nixon with a little bit more of the, I won't say the Kennedy polish, but almost the Clinton polish.
Exactly. And one of the things I really enjoy about Nicholson's performance in this, he definitely studied the way presidents make speeches, impassioned speeches. You can see him moving his hands, doing the thumb grip talk. I mean, I wish I could show the listening audience the movement I'm making right now, but I'm sure we all know what it is.
Oh, yeah. And
clenched fist, thumb up, emphasis.
Yeah, there's so much of it where, yes, I can totally picture a president delivering this kind of speech in exactly this kind of way. He doesn't go too far over the top with it. It's just right.
Right.
Until he comes to his last big speech where he tries to win the Martians over, and he's trying to play it like, well, you know what? The artifice is gone. I'm casual about it. I'm just saying it like it is, but it's still an artifice. You can see he's still laying it on really thick.
He's laying it on even thicker than before, because things like can't we just all get along is him just trying to survive long enough to get out of the room.
I gotta say, even on first release, I remember hearing them throw the Rodney King line into the movie and be like, whoa, I can't believe they did that.
Yeah, it's loaded.
It's very loaded. I guess Burton had a lot of trouble getting actors to sign on for this until Nicholson signed on. And that was sort of opened the floodgates for all these other actors who thought, oh, if Nicholson's going to do it, I want to be in this too.
Yeah, it definitely seems like if he's willing to take a chance on this, we'll try to.
And he really does seem game for the tone of the movie. I will say I'm not thrilled with the Art Land character, at least Nicholson playing him. I know they're trying to go for a Dr. Strangelove Peter Sellers thing. I feel like that one, it just feels a little too cartoony to me.
I really didn't see the point of his character in this story. I'm comfortable if you could explain it to me listening, but I felt like he was just another character.
The only thing I can think of is that, and if I think this would have worked better if it was somebody else playing him, that he is sort of this personification of commercialization that's dragging people down. He's in Vegas for one thing, but he kind of brings Barbara down. He threatens to bring Byron down when he's trying to hire him to be a thug and beat up some guy for money. So it's almost like he's sort of this corrupting influence. So maybe that was kind of the idea behind it. It just doesn't work. It feels like Nicholson playing a character.
I agree. He was very broad, and it felt like a role that could have been done better by a better actor. Well, not better, but better for that role.
It seemed like a stunt. And it seemed like Nicholson just kind of goofing off. I'll get to throw on a fake nose and throw on a bad wig and just kind of ramp it up.
I agree. It did feel more character than human. And that works for some things. There's some roles that really need that layer of artifice, but I don't understand this character at all.
And especially with Nicholson playing him, it just felt like a stunt.
Right. I hate stunt casting.
I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah.
I feel like you really got to justify it in some interesting way for it to work.
Yeah, I was curious because it's so pointed. Why bother having him play two different characters at all?
Well,
is it supposed to be another nod to something that happened in the 50s, or is it something that they just did because?
I think there are two possibilities. One is that it's a nod to Strangelove, having him, like Peter Sellers, play another character in the same movie. The other thing is that allegedly Burton was under studio orders not to kill Nicholson. So he said, we'll put him in another character and kill them both and kill as many Nicholsons as possible. In fact, he asked Nicholson, so which part do you want to play? All of them. I was thinking, you know what would have been better? Take Danny DeVito out of that gambler part, put him in that role.
I agree.
Because DeVito would have just nailed that one perfectly.
And you don't even need the gambler role at that point.
No, it's kind of distracting, honestly. I don't like that particular part in the movie. I feel like that role is just loud and abrasive, and it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But DeVito, I mean, that kind of role, he's really great at playing. I think that would have been fun. Him hamming up to these investors, trying to sell this casino to them, that I think would have been more interesting. Before Nicholson was cast, though, supposedly Warren Beatty was in the running to play the president. I could see him playing that type of goofy character because he kind of did that in Bulworth.
Right.
I don't know if it would have worked as well. I think he might have actually gone a little too far.
I can't say, honestly. I remember Bulworth, and I think I liked it.
I remember enjoying it. I've been meaning to check it out again, actually, because it's been a long time. I don't think I've seen it since that first release. The other actor they considered was Michael Keaton. I think he would have brought a little more of the Keaton manic energy to it, maybe more than it needed.
If he was playing both roles, I could absolutely see him doing a better job of it.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of the Art Land stuff feels very Beetlejuice.
Yes, but then he could pull it back in and be more restrained as the president. And I could see him managing that better than Nicholson did.
If he played the president as sort of that barely kind of aware of his surroundings Bruce Wayne thing that he did,
exactly,
that would have been great. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I felt like with Nicholson, we know it's him both times, and the characters seem a little too samey in their energy. So that might be why I had trouble with those, like why even bother having the Land character.
When Nicholson lets that energy out as the president, it's fun because you almost get the sense this guy is just like really annoyed that he has to deal with this. It's such a drag that he didn't really count on as president that he'd have to deal with an actual emergency.
Or, you know, it may even come down to highlighting that the president is doing exactly what Land is doing, but on a bigger scale. Maybe that's supposed to be what I get out of this.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they They almost seem like they tee it off just for that moment where he can look at the president on camera and go, well, what is that guy talking about?
Exactly. And that's so self-conscious. It really didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, it's one of the things in the movie that just every time that second character is on screen, it's just like, oh, what are we doing?
Yeah, I ran into that a lot.
Alongside Nicholson, we have Glenn Close playing the First Lady Marcia Dale, and I feel like Close plays this as exactly the kind of personality that would represent like the suburbanites from Edward Scissorhands. Shallow, materialistic, and kind of emotionally stunted.
And also just so self-centered, they don't see what's happening around them. The First Lady is obsessed with pulling away the past and recreating the future from the past. She's obsessed with the Nancy Reagan chandelier and the Roosevelt room and how she wants to take away from it because one of the Roosevelts was too fond of some kind of fabric she hated.
Chintz, she says.
Chintz, yeah. So she too is rewriting history, using history, but she's also disrespecting history.
And while as a first lady, you could imagine she could do all this important stuff. She's focused on the trappings and the materialism of it.
Exactly.
All these objects of opulence.
Right. And because we know this took place in May, and they're obviously still kind of settling in, this has been 4 or 5 months. And so far, her contribution to the White House has been whether or not they're going to use blue in a room. I admit, I think this was one of my first real, like, oh, that's Glenn Close. So I didn't realize as an actor, she had such a giant range. And because I saw her in this, I was like, wow, if she does this in everything, she must play really unlikable characters every time. I did not have a good impression of her personality, but now I realize, obviously not her personality. She was acting, but she acted that personality to such a degree I believed that was just her.
Yeah, this might have been one of the first times I remember seeing her play a character this broad.
Right.
Because she was mostly doing a lot of dramas before this, as far as I remember. It's like this, and then it's only a few steps away to Cruella de Vil in the live-action 101 Dalmatians.
Exactly.
I do feel like for casting an actress like Glenn Close, there's barely anything to the part. I almost feel like when she gets wiped out midway through the movie with the chandelier, I was like, holy shit, is that it? That's the end of her character? Because there was such an emphasis in the ads of Glenn Close is in it. And then she has like 3 scenes, several of which she barely says anything, and she's gone.
Marketing is a funny beast. You could have Obama in the movie for a flash of a second, like he just photobombed somehow, and that would be the marketing push.
Well, in retrospect, I think that's sort of kind of the sick joke that Burton's having on the audience.
Yeah,
that you've paid
absolutely.
to see these people, and now you're just, I'm going to wipe them off one by one really quickly and in bizarre ways, and that's all you get of them.
Exactly.
In that sense, it is really funny. Among those considered for the part were Meryl Streep, Diane Keaton, and Stockard Channing.
They all make sense. I think they would have all done a fantastic job with it. I don't know why they chose one over the other.
I know. Streep, I could definitely picture playing
Right.
this after Death Becomes Her. Stockard Channing, I would have been interested to see how she would have done that.
I could see her do it.
And next we come to Annette Bening as Barbara Land. And I have to say this about Annette Bening. Over the past few years, especially after 20th Century Women, I've grown to appreciate just what an amazing actress Bening is. She's one of those ones that I've seen her in tons of movies, Bugsy, The Great Outdoors, The Grifters, The Siege, and she's always good. But now after seeing that movie, I go back and look at her earlier performance and realize, oh no, she's great. She's been great all this time.
That happens with a lot of people, and I don't want to say actors alone, because it's pretty much everyone, where you can be doing your best and no one really notices the way that they should be, and then it'll just click one day and you're like, oh no, this person has been amazing the whole time. I just missed it.
Yeah, she's really great. Again, like Close, she has that range of playing really heavy drama or really goofy comedy. Now, Bening had originally been set to work with Burton on Batman Returns. She was going to play Catwoman. She had the costumes fitted to her and everything, and then she had to drop out when she became pregnant. So he had her in the back of his mind and brought her back for this one. Supposedly she based her performance on that of Anne Margaret from Viva Las Vegas, the Elvis Presley movie. I've never
Yes,
seen it,
you
so
should.
I can't quite judge it on that. But
No, it's right.
here she's presented as this woman trapped in this awful marriage with this sleazy hustler. I almost feel like she's a weird, warped version of Sharon Stone's character from Casino if she had ended up with James Woods. It's interesting because she kind of straddles the line between the type of character you think Burton would hate and the type of character he really likes.
Barbara Lynn's character always confused me, but then we watched it again, and I realized, oh, Burton's making fun of new age, well-to-do white women who is so bored with life, she needs to glom onto spiritual journeys and appropriate from other cultures to make herself feel something because her life is fake.
What surprises me, given that case, and I think you're totally right, that Burton doesn't have her get killed by the Martians, because it seems like exactly the kind of person he would.
Yes.
And I feel like there's some interesting aspects of her character that I will say I think the film drops the ball on a little bit. There's this sense of kind of despair and sadness to her, that she's a recovering alcoholic, that she's concerned about where the plant's going, even if that is just sort of an environmentalist phase she's kind of grafted on. But this sense of this woman really seeking answers, looking for hope anywhere. And when the Martians show up, she thinks this is it. The Martians are going to make everything okay. Everything's going to be great. And when she sees what happens, we see how that turns to total despair and she falls off the wagon. And I would have been really interested if they had, I don't want to say take it seriously, but not play it for laughs quite so much as they do.
The scene I think that we're talking about is when she comes back in and sees her husband, and he's the straw that broke the camel's back, and she grabbed the alcohol.
Well, he's just like, you're worried about today? I'm thinking about tomorrow. The Martians are going to need someplace to stay. He's not even focused on the fact that they're attacking. He doesn't care. He just wants his hotel to open. She hears that, and she's kind of like, maybe we're not worth saving. Maybe humanity should be doomed, and just grabs the bottle and walks off.
That's what it was. I would have done the same thing. So I understand where she's coming from on that. But I was very unhappy with that scene because I don't feel like Annette Bening sold that slump into despair. And again, like you said, it was not taken in a serious way. It could have been.
We see her later on, like, drinking in one of the casinos.
Right.
And then the joke is, for the rest of the movie, she's kind of half drunk as they're trying to escape the Martians. And I think it would have been better to see one scene of her kind of dealing with her despair and really making that decision to, no, I'm going to survive. I'm going to move out to these caves. We see her packing, but we don't really see the thought process behind it. She just kind of shows up and goes, hey, there are caves we can go to. I've got a plane. Let's go. And
I'm not drunk anymore.
She still does have things every once in a while that makes me think she is drunk in those scenes. Like, wait, I like him when Danny DeVito is running off. And I feel like there's a lot more they could have done with that character to make her interesting, to show her really veering away from this disgusting husband and thinking for herself, and she survives because of that. I just feel like the writing wasn't quite there for that character to totally work. And especially that second half in Vegas, as those characters are running off, there's a lot of things there that kind of stumble in the movie for me, and that's one of the big ones. All right, and now we come to one of my favorite characters, Pierce Brosnan as Professor Donald Kessler.
He is ridiculously 50s professor, the blank slate, handsome dude with a pipe.
Always the pipe.
It's always the pipe, but he's exactly the kind of leading man that you see in every single one of these 50s invasion films.
And in this case, the guy who always seems like he's trying to sound smarter than he actually is. He doesn't have a clue what's happening, but he keeps making it sound like he knows what he's talking about. I love that tiny bit of dialogue in the pre-interview scene with Natalie where he's like, so in certain cases, 2 + 2 actually does equal 5. And she's just like staring with this blank stare like, wow, that's great. And it's like he's just slinging bullshit.
Yeah.
But he makes it sound like he knows what he's talking about. The great moment during the briefing where he posits that the Martians have telepathic potential because they have big heads. And they're like, so does that mean they can read our minds? Potentially.
Well, that, and he's like, oh, yes, the pituitary glands, and he takes away a bunch of slime. So you realize he's not identifying any structures in this body. He has no idea what this is and is just randomly saying stuff.
All I can do is look and go like, curious.
Interesting. He has no idea.
It reminds me of Gene Barry in War of the Worlds where he's trying to speculate in the Martians like, well, maybe they could smell colors. And the interviewer's like, what does that even mean? He's just like pulling things out of his ass to make it sound like he's really smart and knows this kind of stuff.
Which happens even more so when they have the alien translation. It's one of those, and I love when they do this in movies. Like, we have no basis for what any of those acts mean, but you know what? We just happen to have a communicator that will translate all of that we need to know into English to alien. And I love how it's trusted. And in 50s movies, it would work. Having it not work here is even more beautiful because that made no sense in the 50s films. Like, how would you know how to do all of this? Of course, there was a rival who actually solved that problem for me.
And did it really well.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem of how do you understand an alien language when you don't even know if they communicate with language?
Contact did that really well, too, by using mathematics.
Right.
I thought that was very clever in that one. Yeah, I love the first translation attempt when it comes out with the "For dark is the suede that mows like a harvest." And Brosnan is just nodding like, that's interesting.
Honestly, when I heard that this time around, I was like, holy shit, they just declared war.
The closest Kessler kind of has to a redemption is that moment on the alien ship when he's disembodied and finally has to admit that he has no idea what's going on. I feel like that's finally the character reaching a point of truth.
Yes. Reminds me of that character in The Core who just realized he's narrating into his recorder for no reason because he's already dead.
I guess Hugh Grant was considered for this part, but man, it's so much better to go with Brosnan because you see Brosnan in this kind of role and you kind of want to take him seriously because he's Pierce Brosnan. He's super charismatic and dashing. And to have him play such a goof is just wonderful. Then we have Martin Short as the press secretary, Jerry Ross. This incredibly lecherous, disgusting dude who, when this movie came out, I almost felt like would have been an exaggeration, but these days with sort of the Matt Gaetz dirty laundry stuff becoming public, it's like, no, they're not really exaggerating. There are a lot of guys in government that are probably just like this. Not a huge part for him, but Short is really good at playing this kind of sleazeball.
He is. One of the problems I had with the cast is that they were all playing zany so big that it didn't give the comedy room to breathe. And I felt that in particular with Short's character, in the scene that we really see him when he's being slimy with the Martian girl kind of thing, it comes at a time when I would have wanted something less broad, but still the same thing, just a little less big.
We don't really get a huge sense of who he is other than he's kind of a sleazeball and he's focused on appearances, which I guess you could kind of say is what his downfall is. He looks at the Martian girl and only sees her looks and goes, oh, perfect. And
he doesn't think anything at all is wrong with this person with strange-ish proportions and what the fuck's with the hair, who doesn't speak or really have a facial expression but chews gum all the time. I mean, this is just purely bizarre.
Everything she's doing just says this is not an actual person, but he can't even notice because she's attractive, and that's all he's focused on. And we see that in his press briefings, too, and everything, that all he's focused on is how this stuff looks, not what's really happening. I will say, I think Short's wig does a lot of the acting for him. That hairpiece is just fucking bizarre, and it just says sleazeball so beautifully. And he is good at doing that weird expression where his eyes don't quite cross, but they get a little foggy and his mouth drops open a little bit, like his brain has stopped working for a little bit, which happens whenever he looks at a pretty girl in this movie. Let's move on to possibly the only character who's playing it completely straight, Jim Brown as Byron Williams. And I feel like he is the grounding from the movie in a way. He is the character we probably most sympathize with. We see him as nothing but this cool, decent guy who's just trying to take care of his family and then trying to get back to his family. There's not a lot of shading to him, but he's a guy that we instantly like and want to root for.
There really isn't a lot of shading for any of the characters, to be fair. I like his arc because it's coming from a standpoint of somebody who has had success and lost it, but is still maintaining their integrity.
Putting on this ridiculous outfit at the casino, posing for snaps with his fans and everything. He's gotten far away from the guy he used to be, the champion of the world. And you get the sense he has all this repressed anger that he can't let out because supposedly anger is sort of the thing that ruined his marriage. So he's trying to be a better man. And he just has to take all this shit and just like keep it inside. And we see over the course of this, as he's fighting Martians, he finally gets to let that out and be the guy that he wants to be, to go back to being the champion of the world. And I kind of love that arc. One plot element involving his character that, boy, am I glad did not make it into the movie was there was supposed to be a scene where he's going through a scrapbook of his victories, and we find out why he separated from his wife and that it was a case of spousal abuse. And I'm like, boy, am I glad they took that out.
Yeah, they really did not need that extra bit for the character because it makes the reconciliation gross to me.
Instead, we just have this sense that maybe he was pulled into violent stuff, and that's what pulled him apart. Because he mentions that when Art is trying to hire him to beat up some guy who owes him money, that he's like, no, that kind of stuff, it ruined my marriage.
Right.
So that works a lot better to me than putting any of that in there because, I would have totally lost sympathy from the character from then on. And granted, in that version of the film, Byron was not going to survive. He was actually going to die in that fight with the Martian. So I guess the idea is that this would have been sort of his sacrifice and redemption, and that would have been it. And
what was the decision to save that character? What was it about the character that made them decide that was the way to go?
I think maybe they realized that having a character who beat up his wife that we're supposed to kind of be on the side of for most of the movie just doesn't work. And once you take that out and you put Jim Brown in the role and he's so likable, it's like, well, we don't want to see this guy get killed. We want to see him reunite with his family. So, I mean, it played out almost exactly the same.
It's the last cheer.
Yeah, that moment where he steps on the Martian head and then we see him walking to the building, it cut off just before that scene. So that was the one thing they added to bring that character kind of full circle. And I think it's a good move. I do wish we could have actually seen him with his family, because we only see them on the phone. And, I mean, you've got Jim Brown and Pam Grier, and we don't really get a chance to see them together. It would have been really cool to have them have a real scene together. And speaking of, Pam Grier, who has a really tiny part in this, I mean, it's great to see her, but you imagine that if this had come out like a year or two later after Jackie Brown, she would have had a much bigger part.
I wanted to talk about that, actually. Her outfit looked so much like the Jackie Brown outfit. It drove me nuts because I couldn't remember date-wise how it went.
That scene where she grabs the kids and throws them on the bus, which is not in the script, is kind of her big moment. That's really it. That's
it's wonderful.
It's a great moment. I love that everybody in the bus just starts kind of applauding, and you can see her almost kind of like take a little bow for them too. But if I see Pam Grier in a movie like this, I want at least a scene of her kicking ass somewhere, you know?
And not just her kids.
Yeah, grabbing a gun and shooting some Martians, punching one of them, something, anything. Because like Byron, her character is, again, one of the few decent and sort of sane characters. The kind of character who feels like, yes, this would be a real person you might actually encounter in real life. And continuing with the Williams family, we have Brandon Hammond and Ray J as Neville and Cedric Williams, their kids. And in terms of changes from the script, boy, this is one I was very happy with. In the original script, the way we would have seen that they could handle themselves with weapons is we actually would have seen them on a rooftop playing with real guns and then hanging out in like alleys while drug deals are going on. And it's like, really, there's a couple of young black kids in the movie. Do you have to do that? So I'm so glad they took that out and just had them play video games.
Right. And it's kind of important they made that change, because in the opposite side of things, we've got two black young men who are playing video games, and then we have one white guy who's playing with guns.
Yeah.
So you're setting a limit here. You're saying, well, the white guy with the gun is the one fucking up. The black people with the video games, they're not really fucking up. They might save your life.
One detail I love is that when the two of them get their hands on the Martian rifles and are shooting, I don't know if you noticed, but they mimic the same moves that they did when they were playing the arcade game, where one will duck back under the other one and stuff like that. And it's a really nice detail that these video games have prepared them for this moment.
But isn't this around the time in the 90s when there was a big stink about video games and violence?
Oh, yeah, there absolutely was.
So showing characters actually have life skills from this may have been a bit of a poke as well.
That's definitely true. I hadn't even thought of that.
I still think it's too far for them to have left that the kids had been gone for 2 days in the script. Like, that should have also been removed from the script.
I agree. That's a remnant of the old plot line that doesn't really feel right.
Yeah, it's a shame because it's a one line. She could have just said the school called and they weren't there.
It's enough for her to see them on the bus that they're not in class and haul them back in, and that would get the same idea across. Yeah. I do love that after that, when they get back to their house, you can see them in the window just like taking pot shots at Martians. After the Slim Whitman song comes up, we see them parading around the streets with boom boxes in shopping carts, killing the rest of the Martians as much as they can. These kids are probably like protecting their neighborhood better than the army could.
Yes.
They're the only ones who really, along with Byron, can handle themselves well when it comes to the Martians.
And it really is interesting how it falls along age lines. Like, you notice that the children and the old people seem to be the ones handling the alien invasion so much better.
Yeah. They're attack the block level good.
Exactly.
Next, we have Sarah Jessica Parker as Natalie Lake. Parker had just worked for Burton on Ed Wood, and plays this character as kind of superficial and dim, but she's so kind of adorable in the part. I can't help but kind of like her.
I'm not a giant Sarah Jessica Parker fan. Nothing against the woman at all. I'm just not a great fan of her acting, but this might be my favorite role of hers. just because it's so opposite of what you'd expect. There's just a beautiful simplicity about the character.
She very rarely seems to have a real handle on what's going on, but it's kind of charming. When they're at the landing site waiting for the Martians and all she can do is pick up her dog, look, they're all here to see you, Poppy. To her, it's still kind of play and goofy and fun.
That's the thing. Her charisma is so high and she's so charming that even if she's fucking up, somebody's going to fix it for her.
She reminds me of Amanda Seyfried in Mean Girls, where she's she's so dense, you can't blame her for anything that's happening. You just want to be like, oh, you're trying so hard.
Exactly. And it's kind of the adorable wounded animal thing where we have this nature that wants to nurture. And babies are adorable because they're helpless, and that's their defense mechanism is help me, I'm cute. So I think it still plays to that part of humanity where like, oh, I'm adorable and my charisma's super high, so you're going to protect me, right? And that's exactly what it is with this character.
I feel like she makes up one half of the movie's critique of the media.
She definitely is the critique of pop.
Yeah, she hosts like a fashion show, which I love that she would have a White House scientific advisor on her show, but she's just immediately attracted to him, which I almost see as that sort of media attraction to, here's somebody who talks well and sounds like they know what they're talking about, so we love them and we're going to put them on all the time and focus on them. Everything they say is just like, ooh, that's really good. That's really smart. I love hearing Parker say the word astrophysics when she's interviewing Kessler. She's so proud of herself for getting that out.
She seems so excited.
Interesting to note that Natalie's little dog in the movie actually belonged to actress Lisa Marie. That was her dog.
Aw.
Right alongside her is her boyfriend in the movie, Michael J. Fox as Jason Stone. For one thing, amazing to see a star like Michael J. Fox playing this tiny part. And I love that he's so willing to make this guy just obnoxious from the get-go.
It must have just been a fun role. Michael J. Fox has a tiny bit of resting smug face, but not so much that it's punchable.
No, see, with him it works. It somehow makes him likable rather than unlikable. I don't know why. It comes across as sort of this cocky self-confidence that kind of works for him. And here I love that he's just a complete asshole. He's so incredibly vain, just looking at himself on TV like, look at the hair. I like the hair. The hair's good, right? Again, he's all package, no actual substance type of news coverage that feels like the perfect outlet for this particular presidential administration that's so concerned about appearance. There's also this really creepy competitive streak that he has with Parker's that he gets really annoyed when she has any kind of news tip before he does. He should be like, we should have that. We should know about this. When she lands the interview, he's like, you can see how much it burns him up.
I think they are both competitive. The way that Natalie answers the phone, really blasé and accepts, oh yeah, I can do this, and then hangs up and waits for Jason to ask her what that was, and just how she throws it out there casually. Now, I would have argued she's just dim and didn't really know what a get this was at that point. But she says, you know, it's not her fault his guys are slow. And then she's incredibly nervous and excited to actually interview him. So I think she knows what a big get this is. And I mean, their relationship is definitely has problems.
See, it's funny. I took it more that she actually was that, not that dense, but that it really didn't matter to her. And that the whole, it's not my fault, your guys are too slow, is more a reaction to how snippy he gets about it. And I don't think her excitement was as much that he's an important get and this important figure, so much as once they're together in the same room, she just kind of naturally gravitates to him. It's much more of a physical appearances thing, which with this movie would kind of fit.
Right.
One thing I will say for the Stone character, though, I do think it's interesting that when things start going down in Pahrump and the attack happens and he sees Natalie's van turn over and she hits the ground, he does not hesitate. He jumps right off of his van and tries to get to her. And he's actually almost being heroic in that moment. And it almost feels like, oh, maybe this is the turnaround when his character is actually going to prove that he has some worth. And a second later, he's killed and his death is made a joke by having the dog just carry off his hand. Which is, again, another Burton moment of, oh, you think this guy is kind of redeeming himself? Now we're just going to laugh at this.
So there's something that we haven't talked about. It's worth talking about really quickly. Okay, so the characters' last names, Land, Dale, Lake, Stone, they're all geographical.
Interesting.
And I know it's not the only last names we get, but that's a significant portion of our cast.
I wonder what it means. I wonder if they were like this sort of placeholder names or something that just stuck, or if the writer was trying to imply something with it.
I'm not sure if the application of the last names to each character mattered as much as just having something as a thematic whole. So, like, these are the people of Earth, the lands, the lakes, the dales.
Because it does seem to focus on the ones who are kind of screwed up and sort of get what's coming to them in this film's morality. Yeah.
Our other characters' last names are like Decker,
Yeah.
Casey. I mean, ones that could possibly be a reference to somebody else, like Ross.
They're also very general, though, I've noticed. Like, it's not specific enough. The only name that seems specific enough, I thought it was a reference, was the casino manager being named Bava. Like, is that
Mario Bava.
Yeah. But they're all, like, just sort of blank and sort of white bread enough that it could be a reference, or it just could be a very bland-sounding name, which, again, would fit all these characters. Okay, let's talk about Rod Steiger playing General Decker. Steiger is no stranger to hamming it up and overacting. Look at the Amityville Horror or End of Days, for examples. And man, I love that he just goes for it with this character, because this guy is such a cartoon. Kind of this swirling mix of Patton and Norman Schwarzkopf and Curtis LeMay and General Ripper from Dr. Strangelove, all kind of thrown together. While the movie doesn't give the scientific community respect, it really doesn't give the military respect via this character.
Not at all.
He's always like 5 seconds away from just ranting and foaming at the mouth. And anytime anyone's not taking his advice, you can just see him in the background of scenes just like, "Argh."
Sometimes I feel like internally that man is me. So I'm not quite sure where to go on this character, because I get his frustration, but maybe don't join the military and have access to weapons.
And don't be constantly putting an order to launch nuclear weapons in front of the president.
Yeah.
His first thing is, here, let's fire some nukes at him. Here's the order. Let's launch nukes.
Now, I agree that's the wrong tack to take under normal circumstances, but I almost feel like if the president had listened, they would have found out so much sooner that they were useless against the Martians. And maybe that would have made them take the whole thing a little seriously much earlier.
I love the pettiness when the president says no, and he just kind of walks back up to the desk and grabs the clipboard, walks back up and then grabs the pen and just sulks away. He's like a little kid who's had his toy taken away.
Aw.
It is weird that post-Cold War, we had a lot of movies like this, like Independence Day, like Crimson Tide, where we have characters who really want to launch missiles at things. Even The Rock comes to mind, too. These characters are like, oh, we've got these weapons. We want to play around and launch them. Let's blow stuff up. Let's do it. It's like we didn't get a chance to use them against Russia, so we got to use them somehow. Let's launch them against something. Next to him is Paul Winfield as General Casey. And if Decker is kind of Schwarzkopf-like, Casey is so Colin Powell. It's amazing.
Definitely. This one feels a little more on the nose.
This seemingly rational man who has allied himself and allowed himself to be manipulated by a really dumb administration into doing things, which gets him in the middle of this mess. History kind of bore that out later on for Powell, but man, when he's on his way to the landing and says, I told you if I just stayed in place and never spoke up, good things were bound to happen. That is such an amazing cutting line coming from a black actor in this movie. I feel bad laughing at it.
Well, it's the kind of laughter that you're laughing because it's painfully true.
Yeah. I also love the subtle idea that they're sending somebody to meet the Martians. They don't know if the Martians are going to be friendly or not. We'll send the black guy.
Yeah, it's pretty cutting.
Yeah. Although there is this sense that in this administration, he's the guy who never really makes a decision. The president actually asks him, General Casey, do you have any kind of opinion on this? As in, like, he's asked him before, and Casey tends to equivocate. And we see that there, that his next answer is just another question. It's like, well, do we know they're hostile? He doesn't really seem to like making decisions. That said, I love that petty little look he gives General Decker when he's the guy chosen to meet the Martians. That little look over like, what do you think about that? Beautiful touch on Winfield's part. Next, we have Lucas Haas as Richie Norris.
So Lucas Haas is one of those actors who I remember really early on. He was a child actor.
He's one of those guys who, he's not flashy, but he does a lot of quality work. And I do kind of wish we saw more of him in bigger parts.
I agree.
In this one, he kind of plays the ultimate slacker. Doesn't always seem like he's totally aware of his surroundings.
And kind of sweet but simple.
Yeah. I love that we see him working at the donut shop, but we never see him actually doing anything at the donut shop.
No, never.
He's always just kind of spread out on the counter watching TV to the point where the other worker has to like kind of prod him every once in a while, and he doesn't even seem to notice. He's always showing up with his family like, hey, anybody want some donuts? And that seems to be kind of the thing that defines his life is the donut, which is a nice symbol.
Which is the saucer.
Yeah, and also something that's just running in circles. But yeah, it's his love for his grandma that not only saves him, but ends up saving humanity.
Right. Instead of throwing away the previous years, the way that Burton himself is not, because he's using his formative year influences as a catalyst for his films. It's best to take care of those connections. Don't throw away the past, which includes your grandparents, because there's a lot to be gleaned. I
was actually going to say, I wonder if that's kind of a reflection of his feelings after working with Vincent Price in Edward Scissorhands.
That would make so much sense.
Which I know was a huge deal to Tim Burton, to the point where he actually filmed part of a documentary of conversations with Price that never got released because he was so heartbroken after he passed. And you could see where he works with Christopher Lee and all these legends of film, that Burton was the kind of guy who liked to go back to the past and find these people who are in movies he loved.
Right. So it would make sense for him to insert himself into one of the heroes, and actually has him eventually hook up with the, what did I call her? Morose, morbid dream girl.
That is a good point.
Yeah. Found the formula, I cracked it open.
And even to the point where the grandmother he loves is played by Sylvia Sidney, who is this grand actress from the 30s who worked with Bogart in movies like Dead End and stuff, and has this huge, illustrious career. So yeah, I think you're right. It's sort of this respect for the past, either your elders in real life or your elders in cinema.
The creative life, right. Yeah.
And I kind of love, though, that the film is willing to make him be kind of an idiot. He's not very smart.
He's simple. He's a simple country boy.
That comment he makes to his grandmother about, like, wow, people must have been really afraid when, like, the train was first invented.
Well, I'm not sure how much that was stupid or how much of that is an example of how people tend to collapse history.
Maybe.
So when you talk to somebody like your grandmother and you're like, wow, what was it like in the 1800s or something, when obviously she was not born in the 1800s.
He's very socially awkward, and I don't know how much of that comes from the fact that we can tell his family really doesn't seem to like him very much or give him any kind of respect.
He's the outsider.
Yeah.
He is the stand-in for Burton. He's the loner outsider.
We have his father actually say, well, we couldn't get lucky with both of them, and even to the point where it shouldn't have been Billy Glenn who died, the implication being it should have been Richie
right.
instead.
Their other child, who is militaristic and, I mean, really, really excited to join the military, which seems to be what they wanted for all of their children. And to have a child who actually has a lot more empathy is difficult for them.
On the other hand, he'll make comments like when Billy Glenn goes off and everyone's so sad, the most he can come up with is, well, he'll be gone for a while. That's it.
Yeah.
It's a really awkward sentence just hanging there in the scene.
Well, I think also he just does not have a connection with them the way they don't have a connection with him.
And we even see in his big inspirational speech at the end, the most he can come up with in terms of rebuilding is, well, maybe we should use teepees because it's better in some ways. Okay, thanks. Bye.
I know. I do love that. Because, I mean, if you can rebuild any way you want at this point, so maybe for him, it's like a peace, love, and teepees. I don't know. Maybe he thinks that going back to an even simpler way of life is the way to go.
In the original script, his speech actually went on longer and it was even more awkward. Like, maybe if we fix things will be happier and we won't need, like, as many psychiatrists and stuff. So that'd be better. Okay. It was kind of like if my brother-in-law was giving a big inspirational speech in front of the remains of humanity, that's what this kind of would have been like. And I say that with all love to my brother-in-law. So let's move on to Natalie Portman as Taffy Dale, who, like Barbara, is a character I think the film kind of lets down.
Definitely. I know she's supposed to be our every person landing point with the first family, but she does not do very much. And she really is, you're right, like Lydia Dietz Light. I'm not sure how much of it is the ensemble nature of the film, that they couldn't explore the characters as much as they actually needed to, or if it was just a light touch with actual characters and looking at them more as stand-ins for certain types of people.
For what little we get of her, we see that scene where she's in the White House and the butler rolls up her pizza It's like the pizza shows. She's still sort of down to earth, and she says thank you. And you can tell by the way the butler smiles at her, the butler actually likes her. And you get the sense she's the only one in the Dale family that the White House staff actually kind of like. My big problem is that narratively, she just disappears in the movie. And in the middle of this scene where she's under threat, she's in the White House, she gets separated from her parents, she gets separated from the Secret Service, she's left alone screaming, kind of running around as these Martians are shooting. And we don't see anything of her again until the very end of the movie when she's giving them the medals.
That's true. So I think what happened is that there are too many characters in this film that this film is trying to give service to. And it's not just that there are too many characters, but because the locations are so split up, you don't have the character interactions you'd need to support a bigger cast.
What I would have liked, I wanted her to hook up with Cedric and Neville. Have them rescue her in the middle of this fight. They take her back to their place. We get some of the characters we like all kind of banded together the same way we get in Vegas with Byron and Barbara and Tom Jones. And she just goes along with them.
And they'd have their little Star Wars.
Exactly. And she's
literally.
She can be like the Princess Leia and sort of now the new representative of the government. She's sort of the leadership role. They're the ones kicking ass. And she starts helping to coordinate this whole effort to defeat the Martians with the Slim Whitman music with them.
And then the prophecy would be fulfilled several years later when she plays Queen Amidala.
I think that would have been really cool. That would have been at least something to do with her character and some place to take her, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That unlike her parents who are ensconced in the White House and have no connection with actual Americans, she's going to be out there fighting with everyday people.
Do you know if that was ever part of any of the working script?
It was not in the script as far as I could tell. Although in the original script, in that last scene when she's giving the speech in Washington, we would have actually seen the Williams family in the crowd. So I wish they had done that. I think it would have made sense.
I think it would have. I agree.
She's kind of all that's left of this particular presidential administration after everything happens. So we joked about her being the sort of the de facto leader of the free world now, but they'd have to, I guess, reorganize elections and everything like that. But until then, they're probably better off with her than some of the other people that would take over.
It's funny because that's not how succession of power works.
I don't know if we're just seeing her give these medals, as she says, as a representative of her parents who couldn't be there, and maybe she's not really in charge, but maybe she's also the only one smart enough to be like, here, maybe we should do this, so this will be how she ends up in charge.
Well, it's also very heavy-handed, pass it on to the next generation. They will save us.
One other one I want to bring up, Jack Black in an early role as Billy Glenn.
Yeah, knowing who he is now, it's an even stranger fit. He's aggressively a meathead. It's like he can do all of these very manly macho things. He can put together a gun blindfolded. But, I mean, he's never really been tested. So the armor that he wears of manliness is just an illusion because he fucks up.
And this will be the moment that's immortalized as an American hero.
Yeah.
I also want to bring up Christina Applegate playing his girlfriend, who barely gets any shots where you can see her face in like 2 lines in the whole movie.
Yeah, she's barely in it.
And it's weird because she had been in movies to that point. She was already in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, so she was kind of known. It's strange to see an actress like her taking on a part this tiny.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's really much more you can do with her character, but it just seems odd to put her in that role.
Well, it seems odd to put her in that role, but also to have a character coming out of Vegas. I don't know what her name is. I don't know if she has a name. She's the waitress.
Cindy the waitress.
Cindy
yes.
the waitress, who barely gets a sentence, but is present on screen with actors who have names and roles and arcs. But who is she?
I think in the original script, she has one other scene where she kind of says hello to Byron, and that's about it.
But it feels so strange to spend that much screen time on an actor who doesn't really have much going on at all and not use time to explore a character when you have an actress, you know. I mean, I could be wrong. I could be mistaking the actress who plays Cindy for someone I should know, but I don't know
I don't
her.
think she is. And I mean, we don't even really get a shot of her outside of without her makeup and wig on to be able to tell.
Right.
Here's where I'm going to overthink it. Maybe this is Burton having fun with us, too, in presenting this kind of nondescript character, an actress we don't know. She doesn't get many lines. She's running around with characters we do know who are played by recognizable actors. Maybe he's thinking we're going to assume she's going to get killed. So the surprise will be that, no, she actually makes it out of this alive. And it's partially because Byron and Barbara and Tom Jones save her life. And it makes them look more heroic for saving this kind of average American who isn't really big and heroic. That's the best I can do. Because otherwise, yeah, it feels really strange. We come to one of the weirdest selling points of this movie, Tom Jones playing himself as Tom Jones action hero.
I have no idea. The only thing I can think of is that he was going back to Ed Wood of like, remember this actor who you knew from long ago? And instead of actor, he went with musician.
Part of it might be, Burton has this thing for 70s kitsch in his movies that shows up a lot in the production design, in the music. I couldn't help but notice, like in the retirement home when they're watching Lawrence Welk on the TV. And you get the sense that this is just the surroundings he grew up in, and he tends to grab that and throw it on screen, as we talked about. And I think Tom Jones is part of that he's part of the music he grew up on. I mean, he used one of his songs in Edward Scissorhands quite notably. So, and I seem to remember him talking about how he'd see pictures of Tom Jones and think of him as like an action hero. And if you look at his album covers, he's usually in this sort of almost James Bondian pose as he's singing. So I guess he thought, all right, well, I'll make him an actual action hero and put him in this movie and have him fighting Martians. And it was following kind of a career resurgence for Tom Jones. He had another hit album, The Lead in How to Swing It, around 1993 and had hits again. So he was kind of in the public consciousness again.
And he would be even more so, can't remember exactly when it was, Emperor's New Groove? Was that 99?
2000? I think it was 2000, yeah. I remember my mother and sister going to see him not long after this movie, and they said it was a really hilarious, fun show. And you can tell that Burton respects him because he makes the film version of Tom Jones this normal, nice guy. Like when he meets Byron, he doesn't assume that Byron should know who he is because he's a celebrity. He's like, oh, hi, I'm Tom Jones.
Yeah.
He just kind of treats him like an equal, which I think is really nice. Also, we see that he's reluctant to leave Byron behind. He's like, we can't just leave without him. He's not a jerk. So
yeah.
And what may be the most iconic performance in the movie, Lisa Marie as the Martian girl.
Yes, definitely an iconic moment.
As a physical performance, it's just absolutely amazing. And as soon as she shows up, I remember just bursting out laughing at how brilliant her weird mannerisms are.
Yes.
How she really sells this thing that looks like a person, but is clearly not very experienced at imitating a person. The way she nods, like by kind of rolling her head, like this is a nod, right? And just that incredible blank affect that she has. You mentioned when we were watching it, the perfectly rhythmic gum chewing so she could breathe.
It is in perfect rhythm and it doesn't stop.
The weird floating gait that she has, the weird way her arms move.
Because it's her arms moving that sells it. The last time I watched it, which was this morning, I realized she's on a type of rolling skateboard thing. Somebody is physically pushing her through, and the only thing she's doing is moving her knees up and down and wiggling her hips and making it look at like a strange walk, but she's not walking at all. She's standing in one place.
It occurred to me that when we see any of the Martians who are wearing capes, they have the same thing where they don't seem to be walking. They just float under the cape. All the other Martians that we can see their legs, we see this have this little bouncing kind of gait to them. But the ones in charge just kind of hover. So maybe it's one of the infiltration ones. She's of that higher echelon or something. I also noticed that she puts in some of the Lugosi hand flourishes here and there when she's using her little spiring.
Yeah, and there's a moment where her pose is very Bride of Frankenstein. It's in the same scene with her arm out.
And with that beehive hairdo, she definitely evokes that.
Exactly.
And that costume where there's no zippers or buttons and she had to be pretty much sewn into it every day on the set. It looks so tight and confining. I can't imagine that was comfortable to work with. Or that incredibly heavy wig, which supposedly gave her scars because of the weight of it on her head. Oh, she's a trooper.
That outfit, it looks like she had to have been sewn into it. It looks like she was wearing some heavy corsets underneath it. And it probably added to her physical performance because it changed the way she could move. Which makes some of the quick movements when she hunches over a little bit to catch up look so awkward. It shows us, oh, they're wearing a suit. She's wearing an uncomfortable human skin.
We should discuss the Martians themselves because we really haven't gotten too far into them. What do you think about the Martians?
I don't know. I was going to bring something up about them as characters. The bird thing. They're scared of birds. They murder birds. Like they are just like, fuck you, bird, zap. My thought is it's supposed to echo the way that humans respond to something very strange. Instant attack. They are land creatures, and I think they said that they lived underneath in caverns kind of thing. You are not going to have birds down there. They might not have birds on Mars. So the idea of seeing something fly through the air, the closest reference they have are their ships. It's not their ship.
Maybe. My thought was maybe there is some kind of predator on Mars that looks like a bird that their immediate reaction is, it's going to attack us, kill it.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. But it's a really strange thing. And as we're watching this again, we were discussing the translator issue. And if that's one of the big motivations, you brought it up a little bit earlier, is this whole thing because the humans fucked up the translator completely?
That's what I think. I think they messed it up and they got a lot of opposites in a way. Like, I mean, that's a simple one-to-one, but let's just say, for argument's sake, when they say we come in peace, they're responding to the fact that what translated from English into Martian was hostile, and maybe the I come in peace translated back the wrong way as well.
Which would work with them running around with the translator going, don't run, we are your friends, which we assume is just a funny joke of them being like, no, come, we're okay,
but
so we can shoot you.
But they were laughing when they said that. So I think that may have been a joke, and I tried to make that fit in the theory of the translator being wrong, but that's probably the moment that breaks that theory.
I do want to bring up, they have a weird obsession with livestock. They burn the cattle, and we keep seeing them like kidnapping cows, kidnapping pigs. We have them on display in their little tubs there. I don't know if this is a reference to the old cattle mutilations thing from UFO lore or not, but it's really odd.
It is. Given the number of different species on Earth, why just farm animals?
I also like this implication that when it comes down to it, they're very human-like. Like, we see these images of destruction at one point, and then we pull back and realize no, it's them watching TV, watching a Godzilla movie.
Yes.
Or the big alien leader just like looking at a Playboy centerfold. That when it comes down to it, they're just enjoying pop culture and enjoying themselves, and that's kind of it. They are not really this advanced species that Kessler thinks they are. They just have cool ships.
Could this be also the idea of an invading force looking different from us, speaking a language you don't really understand, but at the core of it all, you all enjoy the same things. Magazines, TV, you have similar experiences. You're not as different as you seem. So I think if we're to take the idea of the Gulf War being a big effect on this movie, it may be that the aliens are an invading force and the Americans, because I think we only really focus in America, are the invaded people.
I also saw a little bit of cultural appropriation thing too, that now we've come over here, we're going to enjoy all of their stuff.
Definitely.
And also there's their bizarro medical experiments that they keep doing.
It almost seems as if they're doing it just to have fun.
Yeah.
Just to see what would happen. No other reason.
It actually reminded me of, there's this really creepy film that you can find online, although if you're an animal lover, I would not recommend it, called Experiments in the Revival of Organisms, where these Russian scientists supposedly like removed dogs' heads and kept them alive for a while. And this Russian scientist, Vladimir Demikov, who said that he could actually transplant a dog's head from one body onto another and made a two-headed dog and transplanted monkey heads from various bodies. I remember the second X-Files movie kind of had a whole subplot based on this. And I don't know if that was an influence on this, but considering that dog head stuck on Sarah Jessica Parker's body, it kind of brought that to mind to me.
Yeah.
Oh, also, is it just me or did you want the Martian flag when we finally see it to be the same as Marvin the Martian's flag?
I did.
It's Warner Brothers. They should have done that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they didn't just pull the trigger on that one.
What's weird is that the little pyramid with the little dot on the top, I was like, I know that somewhere. That looks like that last symbol from Stargate that they use as the last coordinate to actually get the thing moving.
Huh.
I don't know if that was a reference because that'd come out a year before or just a weird coincidence, but it kind of looks like it. So let's talk a little bit about the special effects. I didn't realize until I was doing research for this that Burton actually wanted to use stop motion originally. And I think that would have been really neat. I understand why they couldn't, but... Incredibly
expensive because it's so rarely used.
Well, also, they found...
And slow.
Because all of these Martians have these plastic helmets, the puppeteers had real problems trying to figure out how they were going to change the expressions, change the heads for different expressions without getting fingerprints or anything else.
Unless they actually made different heads entirely for each move, which they did for Nightmare Before Christmas.
They did, yeah.
But I think on this scale, it would have been different. It probably came down to time and cost as well.
Yeah, budget was a definite one. They actually did hire a British animator named Barry Purves to do tests, and these tests exist. I wish I could find them. I'd love to have seen what they would have looked like. I've seen pictures of the models, and they're pretty cool. I mean, they look pretty close to the CGI ones they used, and they built all these miniature sets, which actually they did end up using in the movie. They just composited the CGI characters onto the original miniature sets they built. But the producer, Larry Franco, when the budget started to get too high, commissioned a test by ILM. They took a background plate from Jumanji and just whipped up some quick Martian models and saw that it was going to work. Burton was convinced, but he wanted it modified so that the motion isn't totally smooth. Like, especially during that landing scene in the desert when the Martians first come out, you can see how the movement's a little stop motion like that's just a tiny bit juddery to give it that look, which I actually really appreciate. In a weird way, making it look a little off like stop motion helps the CGI date better.
It does. It doesn't look nearly as old as it did if it had been smooth the way the fire was smooth on the cows.
Yeah.
Because that was so immediate, and it's the first thing you see that's definitely aged.
I've also had problems with some of the machines, like the giant robot when it finally tumbles over and crashes.
Yeah.
It looked a little, it didn't look quite right. It didn't look like
quite,
it had heft.
Yeah, it wasn't substantial. Even when it was walking, it had trouble, like, actually existing in that space.
Yeah, and some of the saucer landing shots, it doesn't quite feel like the saucer is making the right interaction with the ground when it's landing. Although the saucers themselves I do like quite a bit. And some of the early digital compositing from the 90s, that scene where Martin Short picks up the Martian girl outside the White House and they have to kind of matte in the White House behind them. You can tell that the loss of image quality there is a little too thick.
Yeah.
And there was some practical model work used, which I always appreciate. When the saucers crash into each other, you can tell that was an actual model. Some of the jet planes being blown up, Big Ben being exploded when they're attacking England. Individual things like that. Now we move on to the music. This one's kind of important because this movie represents the reunion of Tim Burton and Danny Elfman after their little feud.
Their post-Nightmare Before Christmas reunion.
Yeah, where I guess working on that one for over 2 years, they just eventually just kind of had a riff that developed, which led Burton to use Howard Shore to score Ed Wood. And I am really glad they got back together because, man, those two guys just fit together so well.
They do, yeah.
And kind of following Ed Wood's score, there's a lot of the theremin here. We've discussed the theremin as a science fiction instrument, and man, he makes great use of it here.
If the composer of this film had missed using a theremin for the homage part of it, and it just has that creepy.
It's creepy, but also lets you know you don't have to take this totally seriously, that we are going for really old-fashioned type of sci-fi here.
Right.
And also the choirs. There's a lot of creepy male voices doing this wah kind of thing at points in the score that I really, really like. I love the weird sort of lounge theme that Elfman puts together for the scene in the Kennedy room. You can barely hear it over the scene, but it's really groovy and again feels like something that could have been in Edward Scissorhands. We also have to talk a little bit about the production design and the costuming. The costumes were done by Colleen Atwood.
I mean, she's worked with Burton before. Any of the films where his characters need to have a look, not just a period costume, but an actual look, she worked with him.
Going to what we were talking about Burton kind of grabbing from different time periods, that's all over the costume in this movie.
Yes.
Like, the army costumes are very 1950s. Natalie's outfits have a very 1960s mod kind of quality to them. And the dissection suits that they're wearing are straight out of like a Destination Moon 1950s look. Those crazy like bubble heads with the weird white collared outfits. And we were talking as the film went on about how some of them kind of reflect the alien nature of what's going on in there. You brought up with Natalie's outfit in particular.
Yeah, Natalie's outfit has this giant hat and it's silver, so it looks as if she has a flying saucer on her head. And on top of that, she has head to toe at that point, including her undergarments dressed in silver, which I don't know how much of that is a nod to alien spaceships and the idea that silver is the color, or the idea of aluminum foil protecting you from alien brainwaves or something.
Or even a throwback to sort of the Flash Gordon weird, scantily clad in silver kind of look, yeah. Meanwhile, her boyfriend Jason has a tie that has little circles on it that seem to imply the little weird Martian gesture there.
There's this circle motif everywhere. It's the symbol the aliens make, which seems to be a type of salute or representative of Mars. The donut in the donut shop. There's also a pool float and that's circular. And they're everywhere. Ties, it's...
polka dots on a lot of things.
Right. So definitely circles are a motif. Also kind of has a hand also in the kind of crop circle thing. Is another
that's true.
type of circle that I don't think we do see in this, but it evokes that.
And a lot of things that we see in other Burton films in terms of costuming, swirls and stripes are always big. We get the swirls in a few places, like on that farmer's shirt in the opening scene with the burning cattle, and certainly on the Martian girl's outfit. And I noticed this time that when we see Taffy in bed, you can just see she has on these socks that have stripes, just like we'd see on other Burton characters. And we only have a few characters who actually look like they belong in this time, and most of them are other young people. Richie with his Alien Sex Fiend t-shirt.
Not just the Alien Sex Fiend t-shirt, but the 90s hair and plaid.
Yep.
Yeah, so he had the look down.
And when we researched that Alien Sex Fiend was like a goth rock band, it's like, oh, that pulls him in with Taffy even better.
Not just that, but it's very purposely put there by Tim Burton, I think.
Especially because that logo on it, I swear that's from an Outer Limits episode with Warren Oates where he plays this human who's mutated into having giant eyes. So that might be another little nod within a nod. Cedric and Neville, their clothing is very contemporary. Taffy, for the most part, although we don't get to see too much of it because she's usually like swaddled in like black blankets and stuff. And I also noticed in the crowd scenes that Atwood goes to a lot of trouble to give them really crazy blaring colors in a lot of those. Anytime that there's a big crowd watching the Martians, we get really crazy primary colors.
Well, the Martians are wearing green, right? And their symbolic color's red. So reds, oranges, greens, and I think sometimes blue. So they're hot and cold colors that are really high contrast, and it makes it look even more cartoonish. It's highlighting the goofy nature of the film.
All right, some trivia for the movie. The town the Martians land in for the Peace Summit and then massacre, Pahrump, Nevada, is a real town and not coincidentally is the home of famous radio host Art Bell, who covered paranormal subjects including UFO lore on his Coast to Coast show, which you can find some of the old reruns of. Here's a big one. It's a little foggy who created the Martian language. Burton credits somebody who just started yelling yak yak into a tape recorder to create sound for a storyboard reel. But Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, when they were doing their draft of the script, claimed they invented ak ak as a placeholder in their draft, and the placeholder was just never removed. So we'll never quite know, but what a brilliant choice to just have it be this ak ak noise that sounds progressively angrier the more one of the Martians speaks.
I feel like they speak my language.
They definitely speak my language. I still do this all the time. On one of the Martian ships, we see one of those kind of specimen containers holding a large clown. Now, some people speculate this is supposed to be the clown henchman that the Penguin murders in Batman Returns who ends up in the lake.
Yeah.
You also see one of the Martians carrying off a cow on his back. The CGI cow is actually the very same CGI cow model from Twister. The ILM guys just grabbed it and stuck it onto the back of the Martian.
Amazing.
One of the amazing wigs for the female Martian agent was accidentally left behind by a designer in a New York cab, resulting in the hair department having to make another one at a cost of $25,000. Can you imagine being in a cab and just finding this bizarre beehive wig sitting in the back of your car?
And not returning it? Also, that is one hell of a loss.
That's expensive as hell, yeah.
Yeah, that's a department that probably fired that designer.
Probably. Very famously, the destruction of the Galaxy Hotel in Vegas, that scene took advantage of the real-life demolition of the Landmark Hotel and Casino. They filmed the controlled implosion of that from a certain angle, just added in the ship, shooting out a ray. But that is a real building being blown up. I remember the big hubbub when they were filming that for this movie. The collection of old Vegas neon signs that Barbara, Byron, and the gang run through is known as the Neon Boneyard and can be toured in Vegas through the Neon Museum. I've always wanted to see that because that thing looks really cool. The French president who makes the mistake of trying to negotiate with the Martians is played by noted director Barbet Schroeder, the guy who directed Barfly, Reversal of Fortune, and Single White Female. I love that they got this notable director for this tiny little cameo. And here's the really weird one. Howard Stern later joked that the filmmakers took the movie's climax from a 1982 sketch on his New York radio show called Slim Whitman versus and you'll pardon me for this, the Midget Aliens, in which the music of Slim Whitman is used as a weapon against an alien invasion.
Interesting.
While he was on Stern's show, Burton dismissed it as a weird coincidence. As for the legacy of the movie got mixed reviews, didn't do great business, and it would be 3 more years before Burton would come back with Sleepy Hollow, where He again paid tribute to a different style of film that he loved, in that case, Hammer Horror, and that was a much bigger hit. I do remember there was a huge blitz of merchandising for this movie. Toys everywhere, all sorts of stuff for kids, which seems a little weird considering the movie doesn't feel like it's really aimed at kids.
Right. The film is definitely, teenagers or above.
Yeah.
I guess the aliens themselves are kind of cool to look at, so they were thinking maybe that would be the appeal. Even if they didn't see the movie, they'd see the aliens and want the toys.
On the other hand, Beetlejuice was a big hit with everybody, and that was actually popular with kids and had toy lines and stuff too, and even a cartoon show. So maybe they were looking at it that way. I don't know. Over time, I do feel like the tide's turned on this one, and it's gained more respect. And
it's definitely been re-examined, yeah.
Its cynicism, I think, kind of feels a little more borne out by history, especially right now. Okay, what's your favorite scene?
Honestly, I can't come up with a favorite scene per se, but anytime one of the Martians screams, ack, like just gets fired up, goes from a lower ack to just the screaming ack, that's my favorite. Every single time that happens, the Martian and I become one. I understand it fully. It understands me.
For me, it has to be the nuclear attack scene, because I remember seeing that scene play out in Independence Day and recognizing it as an almost shot-for-shot remake of that scene from War of the Worlds. So to see it a third time, and for it to take the comic twist it does, where they just inhale all the radiation in this little machine, suck it up like helium, and then start speaking, in a high-pitched voice of and burst out laughing. It's just brilliant. And then the reaction of Nicholson's president of just like throwing up his hands like, well, great, that didn't work. Perfect. Okay, recommendations.
Well, I mean, the easy recommendation, and that's probably the one I'm going to go with, is to just take a dive into 50s sci-fi films. If you didn't like this, seeing those actually might give you a better understanding of where the film is coming from, what it's trying to do. So whether you like or didn't like them, it would be worth visiting.
Along those lines, I would recommend a specific one I mentioned earlier, Invasion of the Saucermen. You might not have seen the film. It's actually kind of hard to come by these days in terms of streaming or DVD releases, although sometimes you can find it on YouTube. But you've probably seen the image of the aliens from this movie with these giant heads and these weird, crazy eyes and pointy ears. And I think they are a big influence on the original Mars Attacks Martian design. And the movie kind of has a similar vibe. It's sort of a sci-fi horror comedy about these aliens accidentally invading a lover's lane and these teenagers who have to fight them. And much like this film, the older generation is completely ineffective and useless in this emergency, and it's the kids who have to rise to meet the challenge and save the day. And it's a lot of fun. It has Frank Gorshin, the Riddler from the old Batman series, in it, as this crazy guy who thinks once he gets a hold of a Martian body, he can sell it and make money off of it. So it's kind of playing on some of the same vices as well. It's a lot of fun. That ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Mars Attacks or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on CinemaSpection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to CinemaSpection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at CinemaSpection. For our personal accounts, I'm at TimosaurusR.
I'm at Hagatha Luz.
We're also on Instagram under CinemaSpection. Our show is available on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We're also now part of the Fireside Alliance podcast network. Check out some of the other great shows on the network at www.firesidealliance.com and join our Discord. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen.
So Michael J. Fox has a tiny bit of resting smug face. I mean, I don't think we talk about these problems, really. I mean, people have resting bitch face. We all know about it. Mm-hmm. But there are so many other resting faces. Some people have resting smug face.
Some have resting punch me in the face.
Some people have mine, which is kind of like doom. I've resting doom face.
It's like resting Ralph from Friday the 13th face.
Yes, it's resting doom face.